Bag Day is now a thing of the past. First has finally decided to get rid of it. I don't know what the consensus is. I think some people are pretty happy that it's gone. Others really aren't. But so yeah, today I'm gonna talk a lot about that. Talk about why Bag Day existed in the first place, and how no Bag Day will change FRC. A bit of a spoiler about my entire talk is it doesn't really change a whole lot, at least for 1325. But for some other teams, it may actually be a very, very big, nice thing that will help teams kind of jump up in performance. I'll talk a little bit about setting yourself up for success before the season even begins. I'll talk a little bit about Practice Robot and what their new role will be. And then I'll do like a quick start guide to R&D and FRC, and you'll kind of realize in a little bit why I'm going to be talking so much about research and development, because it's going to play a much bigger role than it did before. And I'll do my best to have the last bit of this talk to just ask me questions about anything robotics. So what Bag Day was supposed to be. So Bag Day was first attempt at equalizing the playing field. So they tried to constrain every single team to the same amount of time. In the efforts that, since every single team has the same amount of time, the robot performances on the field will be somewhat similar. Because everyone would have to spend the same amount of hours on their machine. So in principle, kind of makes sense. But what Bag Day actually did was it created a much further performance gap between very highly funded teams and teams that were not so highly funded. Teams such as 1325 and teams who were kind of in our range of performance were essentially starting to buy time. We were spending a lot of money buying components that we honestly probably could have made in an effort of saving time. And then practice bots, a really big thing. We started using, basically using money to get around the Bag Day. So although one robot kind of sat in the bag, we could have another robot, and in some cases, other teams had two other robots, which were still sitting in their shop that they could work on autonomous modes, research and development, and driver training. So 148 and 1678 are the two teams that I know of. In 2018 and 19, they built 3 full robots. So one would go in the bag, 2 of them would be used for practice, and they built 1 half robot, which is kind of like a test bed for them. Yeah, it's fair to say it got a little out of hand, which is why first ultimately decided to remove it. So how will FRC change without Bag Day? Not a lot. For the most part, timelines kind of stay the same. You still technically have a stop build day, because you need to go to competition starting weeks later. So yeah, not a terrible amount will change, but the FRC development race will get a little bit more intense. So the FRC development race is what I kind of coined teams that would take the robot to week 1, see other machines, and then start to optimize their robot to become better and better. So you would often see this with 254 was a great example in 2015, where they just took apart the entire front of the robot and put what 1114 had, or a version of that, because it was just the best intake that was out there. So now that there is no Bag Day, you don't really have to worry about, oh, I need to put together this mechanism on my robot in 6 hours for district, or I have to do it during a practice day of a competition. Now you can do it kind of whenever you want. So the FRC development race will get slightly more intense. Yeah, quality and quantity of autonomous modes will increase. So 1325 is the classic example of we're always we're gonna have the sickest autonomous this year, and then we kind of keep pushing it off, and then we put the robot in the bag, and we're well, that's that. So now that robots don't go in the bag, there's now more time to work on autonomous modes. They don't get pushed off so much because they're sitting out of the bag. And lastly, probably, hopefully, for me at least, the biggest thing that will change is FRC driver performance as a whole will get better. Yeah. I'll talk a little bit more about FRC drivers kind of later on. So at the end, that's what FRC without Bag Day is going to be like. Yeah, so there's some things that you can do before your season even begins to set yourself up for success. A lot of these things that I'm about to talk about applied before Bag Day still, but they're just things that will become a little bit more apparent without it. So the things I'm talking about is, how does your team define success? What events that you will be competing at? And does your robot design lend itself to modification? Say you get it wrong. So yeah, the biggest thing that is very often overlooked is set season goals. On 1325, for a very long time, this wasn't done. And it presented a lot of issues, because if you don't have a season goal, you don't have any way to measure whether you're having a successful season. So yeah, starting to set season goals kind of gives us a direction when we're developing and creating a robot. So every single time we're evaluating how is our season going, we had something to kind of look back at to see whether we were reaching our goals or we were under them and something needed to be changed. They should be more specific than when. And yeah, oftentimes goals don't even have to be related directly to competition. So it's perfectly reasonable to have a goal of winning a district event. That's fine. Your goal could even be seed within the top 15 of your district event. Your goal could even be build a mechanism that best teaches STEM to students. So it's like fully dependent on kind of what your team is, and the goals that I'm about to show you for 1325 don't necessarily apply to everybody. Everybody should really go to their own team and kind of decide what is best for you. Don't do that. So this was the past three years of 1325 season goals. 2017 was actually when we started taking goal setting really seriously. So in 2017, our goal was win one district event and qualify for championship. We hit one of those two. 2018, it was win 2 district events, contend for a DCMP win, and win DCMP chairmans. And then 2019 was win 2 district events, DCMP chairmans. We want to be championship chairmans finalists, and we want to win a championship. 2019 didn't go the way we wanted it to, but you know, it happens. So these are kind of, whenever we're designing and building a robot, you can see some award stuff in there. So awards as well, they take goal setting pretty seriously and use it to evaluate their success. But you can see these are every single decision we make on the robot when we're designing it, building it, training drivers. We always look back to these because ultimately this is what we're trying to win. So for example, in 2019, not really being in it for DCMP, trying to win a DCMP wasn't really a big factor for us if it meant we were moving towards trying to win a championship. Does anyone have any questions on goal setting so far? No.
What kind of resources do you take into account when you're setting these goals?
So when we kind of look to previous years, first of all. We know it's unrealistic, especially when we're in 2017, 2016, to think that we would go straight to not winning a district event, but then going straight to championship. So we try to kind of build like stairs or steps to where we want to go. We look at often mentor resources, so the mentors we have available to us, and we look at financial as well as manufacturing. Later in this talk, you guys will learn 1325's manufacturing resources actually aren't spectacular. We had a lot of sponsor-done stuff and decided to move away from using sponsors and more manufacturing stuff in-house. Just because relying on sponsors can go very badly very quickly when your sponsor's like, hey, I'm swamped, I can't make any of your stuff anymore. So yeah, 1325 like really moved away from doing that, and you guys will notice all of 2018 forward, all of our stuff is made in-house on a drill press and like a tiny little blade. So yeah, did that answer your question? So choosing an event. So this was always the kind of case. It's the only math that I have in this, but week number is proportional to the difficulty of the game. Yeah, as weeks go on, the game kind of gets harder to play. And there's plenty of reasons for this. Number one, the first week, people don't really have a full grasp on the rules or any strategy kind of metas in the game. You'll notice as FRC games kind of move on, strategists begin to find the best ways of scoring and the most appropriate ways to go about it, which really, really helps. And then other two things is robots get more dialed in, so people start to compete, start to realize, oh, I should change this, or another team is doing something very similar to me. Let me see how they're successful so I can be better. And the last one, probably the biggest factor, is driver training. As the weeks go on, drivers get way better. So if you want to think about it, is each week number, like you start in week 1, the game's kind of at the beginning difficulty, if it was a video game, and by week 6, it's an expert. But yeah, so you might think, why would I ever go to a week 6 event then if it's just harder? But the consequence of it being like, it's later on, you have way more time to work on your robot. So going to a week 6 event might be pretty good for you because you have way more time, but you just gotta keep in mind that the game will not be played at the same level as it is week 1. So 1325, for example, we love to go really early. So we always try and do a week 1 or a week 2. We wanna make sure that our robot plays the game well. And it's usually a really good way to bag a bunch of points early on. And then we move to a way harder event for our second in an attempt to figure out how we stack up against and basically get practice for DCMP and chairman's, or championship. So yeah, for every single team, it's different. It depends on kind of your resources. So if you're only meeting a couple times a week, it's probably not the best idea to go super early. Give yourself some time. Yeah, so just one thing to keep in mind is that all events, depending on the week, are played at kind of like a different level. Does anyone have any questions on that?
And also some events by their location or hurdle, Waterloo has been for years infamous.
Yeah, so Ontario is interesting because it's such a kind of closed off area compared to FRC in the States, that you often see the same number of teams multiple times in your season. So it's a kind of thing to keep in mind is who likes to go to which events. But it also kind of dependent. Because like for example, if you're a robot, you play really sick defense, or you do really well at cargo ship, you may want to go to the same event as OP, because that's what they're looking for in a pick. So going to a more competitive event can kind of get you to go a little bit further. If you're a team such as 1325, we do everything in our power to avoid OP, because we have just like a history of losing to them. Yeah.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. Everyone in the Ontario does. Like, looking at finals play.
So yeah, yeah. I don't want to like fully go into it, but like a big part of like the competitiveness of Ontario kind of is given to OP and Sims. Like for example, 1325, we were like really bad many years ago, but it was like constantly losing to OP and Sims. We're like, we can't take this anymore. We need to do something. So yeah. So yeah, this was in my presentation last year. I don't really know if it applies anymore because I don't know how many spots are in First Ontario anymore. So before you were able to go to you could go to 3 events if you wanted to. The first 2 events counted for points, and your third event was just like for you to go and kind of take your robot and count for much other than chairman's and EI, I think. So you could qualify for DCMP through those 2 things. But yeah, should you go to third event? If able, absolutely, you could try wild things. Third events are really awesome for like, you can try something really radical on your robot. You can throw a new intake on it, make it way faster. And you don't really have much consequence if it doesn't work, you can just kind of switch it back. Yeah, one thing to keep in mind though, the reason 1325 stopped going to 3 events is you're going to like 3 events, and then if you're going to DCMP, that becomes 4, and 4 events in like a month and a half can tend to burn out students and mentors. Mentors are taking a lot of time off of school and work. So just a thing to keep in mind that you gotta balance it, because sometimes you get to DCMP and everyone is so over it, and you don't want that to happen. So yeah.
And the other thing that I know our team in 1310 has been spitballing this for a while, we've never done it, but it's possible to go to an event outside of district, like one in the States, and it basically, you'll be able to go there, it won't count for any of your district points, but you can still do it if you want.
Yeah, so if you go to a regional, I think you can still qualify for championship should you go outside and win it or chairman's there. So yeah, should you go to a third event, if you can, I would recommend it, but just like make sure that it's within your team's resources. So yeah, choosing a kickoff strategy. A lot of people today are going to talk about this at various workshops, so I'm going to be a little light on it, but stay within your abilities. Make sure you identify what your team's constraints are, whether it be fabrication resources, mentor knowledge, student knowledge. Maybe you don't have a workspace, you can only do 2 hours a week or something like that. So make sure you're designing a robot within those abilities. It is totally possible for every single team, regardless of how many resources they have, to field a fairly competitive robot. I think if teams stay within their abilities and understand, hey, we don't meet so much, maybe we should make a cargo ship robot rather than trying to do all the rocket, or in the case of 2018, maybe we should do a switch and defense robot rather than scale. Yeah, you can be very, very successful not doing everything in the game. And I can't stress that point enough. So choosing a kickoff strategy, something to keep in mind, definitely not first and foremost in your mind, but especially with no bag day now, is don't box yourself in. What do you do when you hit your upper limit? So FRC games, usually have multiple ways of scoring. They've been doing this for a while now. So 2017, you can do fuel or you can do gears. 2018, you can do switch or scale. 2019, you can do cargo ship or rocket. But just make sure you don't box yourself in. So for example, in 2019, say you built this really good cargo ship robot. The problem is now you're going to be able, by week 6, as the game gets better and robots get better, you will finish the cargo ship and still have 30, 45 seconds left. What do you do in those 30 and 45 seconds for the rest of the game? So this could be making sure your drivetrain is great. For defense, it's training your driver on defense. It could be adding a retrofit kind of climb or something like that. So one thing in kickoff is to just keep in mind is when I hit my upper limit, where do I go from here? So when I'm sitting with this like minute left because the cargo ship's done and my robot isn't capable of doing the rocket, where do I go from here? Yeah. So this is 1325 and 2018. We did our best not to box ourselves in. This was our buddy hang that was designed and somewhat built to make sure that come by the time of district championship and championship that we were capable of lifting another team and getting the RP. Unfortunately, it never came together because we were like a really heavy robot that year. But yeah, it was kind of a thing that 1325 did to make sure that we weren't kind of stuck. So, manage your time. In FRC, I've talked to like a lot of people and tried a lot of things. There's no one way to manage time. People say like a progress tracker, an Excel sheet, or setting really hard deadlines. It's really team dependent, and on 1325, we haven't really found anything that's worked super well. The main thing that we do is we set pretty soft deadlines. We have a very good idea of where we want things to be at certain times. So for example, we want our drivetrain being almost fully catted by the Tuesday after kickoff. We have usually a Wednesday in week 3 where we want the entire robot CAD to be done. And anything that needs to get sent out, and anything that needs to be manufactured beginning. And our goal is to have the entire practice robot completed and running by week 5. Often, this doesn't happen because FRC, things change a lot. And yeah, we tried using like a progress tracker to make sure we were on time, but very quickly everything becomes red because nothing is done. And then it's not really helpful anymore because you know exactly what you need to get done, so there's no point just kind of like moving the boxes around. So on 1325, we kind of found that parts are a really good way of knowing how far along your robot is. And parts are something everybody needs to keep track of. So this is 1325's custom part directory for 2018. It's a pretty wild spreadsheet. But this is our way of knowing what state every single part of our robot is in, whether it be a custom part, which is all here. This includes everything that is being sent to a sponsor, to everything that's being made in-house. So we kind of have an idea of where everything is at. And this is a really good way for us to know kind of where our robot's going. Have we, for example, made all of our elevator components? Are they all done? And then we have kind of an assembly train, or assembly kind of column as well, to make sure that things are put together. And this was kind of the best way that we found for staying on track, because there's so many things that go into an FRC robot that it's really hard to kind of put them all together. And we've kind of found parts is a really good way of doing that. That being said, 1325 is like never on time when we do anything. Like we're no OP, so yeah, just put that out there. Yeah.
Am I marking the legend?
Yes. So this is kind of what it looks like. So we have our part number. It's kind of cut off a little bit. But
zoom out so you can see it. No, like on the projector.
no, that doesn't work.
On the physical
on the
projector.
projector.
Like,
Move it,
Okay.
move it forward. Move it towards the computer.
There we go. Okay. So I had it and then I didn't. Okay. So to some, these are just kind of numbers, but they're pretty systematically done. So 1325 and 2018 is just so we know when we send it to a sponsor, they know what they're doing and who they're doing it for, because we share quite a number of sponsors with other FRC teams. We have the year, just to keep track of which part is for what year. The next number is our assembly number. So every single assembly on our robot's given a number, whether that be drivetrain, elevator, manipulator on the front, or a climber, and then the next to it is part. So if we see, like for example, all of our 200 parts are sent out and we got them back, we know that that assembly is ready to be built, and then it moves kind of into our assembly column, which is on the other side. And we can see whether it's progress. Where it's progress is completed in the last date that it was kind of updated. Yeah, we have the same similar thing for off-the-shelf components. So we keep track of kind of everything that gets sent out. So we grab its part number, description, vendor, kind of stuff, and then that's our thing. Yeah. Geez, how much money do you think we have? It's a pretty big problem on 1325. Like, remember this year, like we had like there was like these tiny little rubber bumper stocks that we want to use to stop the elevator from like smashing into the metal. They're like $20 to $8 each, and we needed like 30 of them. So yeah, that's kind of how 1325 best keeps track of where our project is at any given time. Yeah, once again, strongly recommend. Talk to your own team, kind of figure out what works, try things out. Because what we do may not work so well for you, but a big part of it is before the season even begins, talk with your team about when you guys think realistic deadlines would be to make sure things get done. And then trying your best to stick to them. We use soft deadlines because if you set a hard deadline, you'll never hit it. It usually never happens. So creating like a cushion of, oh, I want it to be done by between the Wednesday and the Friday, this needs to get done. Hands up if you use CAD to create your products. Cool, that's great, okay. So a note about CAD, it's really easy to get stuck in CAD for a very long time. It's really easy to spend a lot of time working out every single intricate detail of CAD, making sure everything fits together perfectly. And 1325, we've gotten trapped in that quite a few times. And in the end, what we like to do is we usually set the end of week 3. That is the last date for anyone to work on CAD. Should anything still not be done by that point, it's getting sent out anyway the way it is, and we will deal with whatever issue comes when you put it together. Sometimes it's really easy to get really trapped in CAD, and like some small intricate detail isn't working out, or you're stumped on how to do it. And in the end, it's just easier to put the thing together. It's together, you can now see it, visualize it, and then as a team, you can come up with a solution. So in 2018, 1325's 2018 machine had no way of connecting our carriage to our elevator because we couldn't figure out how to do it. It was just something that was really difficult because, one, you can't add chain in CAD easily. But yeah, so we had no way of doing that. We built it, we put it together, kind of rolled up and down, but had no way of powering it up. And then together as a team, we spent a day and figured out how to put it together. So yeah, although do your best to CAD as much as you can, don't get stuck in it. Sometimes it's just easier to create the thing, put it together, and then kind of work out any intricacies from there. Any questions about managing your time? Yeah.
Have you guys traditionally built your practice spot before or after your competition bot? And do you plan on changing that with
I'm getting to that in the next slide.
Cool.
Awesome, thanks.
Not sure if you're able to talk about, but how do you guys, for your build season, what do the days look like? Like how many days a week are students building? What's the time frame there?
Yeah, so 1325, as Tyler Boltzmann would deem us, is crazy. We meet 5 to 9 or 5 to 9:30 every single day of the week, except Saturdays where we are 9 to 5, and some Saturdays, depending on how behind we are, they turn to 9 a.m. to 10 a.m. days. So yeah, we're crazy. We're doing our best to slowly start bringing that down now, because we realize it is kind of wild. But yeah, which is one thing in FRC, I know a lot of teams have a very similar kind of working hours to us, and it's definitely not healthy and good. So we're looking into ways to go to a more 3-day to 4-day a week approach. Because oftentimes you'll find out, you go to a meeting and like none of your parts are here and you're doing absolutely nothing. And you're like, okay, wait, why did we even come today? So yeah.
It's scary.
Kind of what 13.5.
Often when teams are working like 7 days a week, and then they're like, we should probably dial it back, the season result improved because everyone's more well rested. Like straight up, on my high school team, we used to work 7 days a week, like no breaks, 6 weeks in a row. And like Saturdays and Sundays were brutal because it's 9 to 9.
Yep.
And then you're just like, you have no time for anything else.
For
You're
sure.
just a zombie.
Can't agree with that one. Yep.
No,
How would your schedule be changing with bad day being removed?
So as of right now, our schedule is not changing. We are gonna try and hit the exact same deadlines that we were trying to hit pre-May. Some deadlines will be relaxed a little bit. So for example, our drivetrain needs to get out the Tuesday of after kickoff, might get relaxed to, if we need to work on it till Friday, that's fine. So it'll be less pressure to make sure things are hitting the deadline that we kind of set for them. But for the most part, we're gonna aim to hit the same days. And the reason for this is on 1325, we suspect that a lot of teams will get the illusion that they have more time. And we want to make sure we don't get into that, because if you think you have more time, you're like, oh, I'm competing week 4, the robot can be done by week 4. You get to week 3 and none of it is tested or run, which is what happened with Bag Day. We don't want to end up falling kind of into that trap. And as I mentioned earlier, we tend to compete very early in the season. Yeah.
So
So you would have like a stop build day?
Yeah, so we would have a stop build day. It would be, yeah, we'd be aiming to finish the robot by whatever the bag day would have been, which is the Family Day weekend. So that for us is not changing.
Is that partially the reason because you're competing week 1?
Part of it, yes, is competing in week 1. 1325, we have a big philosophy on building a robot, testing it, and then changing it to be better. So we like to put a robot together, get our driver to run autonomous modes, and see, okay, what's not working or what can be working better, and then change it. So the bag day being gone is just going to allow us to leverage that more. So the earlier we finish the robot, the more testing it gets. Which is going to kind of what I'm going to come to with our practice robot. So does everyone here know what a practice robot is? Yeah? Cool. No? Okay. So a practice robot is an identical twin to what a competition robot used to be. So this is 1325 2018 practice and competition robot. Competition robot offset. Takeoff was our practice robot. They're two completely identical machines. For someone's question, 1325 during with bag day, we would always try our best to create the practice robot first, test the practice robot, the competition robot be a bunch of parts, and then once the practice robot's tested and work, then we build the competition robot. That never happened. We have never done that. Every single year you kind of get to a point where they're both kind of being built in unison. So what we do is we always build the practice robot one step ahead of what the competition robot. So if the practice robot's getting an elevator, the competition robot's getting its drivetrain, but they are both being worked on at the same amount of time just to make sure we finish them. When bag day was around, 1325 often, very, very often would bag a competition robot that had never been turned on and usually wasn't finished. And we'd use the 6-hour on bag to put the last, for example, our manipulator, 30 pounds, we'd slap it on, and use the practice robot for all our testing. With bag day now being gone, we are now going to change that. So 1325's practice robot will be created, fully tested, fully run, while the competition robot is kind of just a bunch of parts that are sitting somewhere in our shop, and we will not put together our competition robot until about a week and a half-ish before our first event. Yeah, and I'll talk a little bit more about practice robots, but yeah, they were used to continue work on autonomous modes after the robot was bagged. They were used for a lot of R&D testing, and can't stress it enough, driver practice. So practice robots are not exactly a thing of the past. So FRC robots have a built-in expiry date in all of them due to the methods and materials used to make them. So FRC robots have a 120-pound weight limit and often have a lot of things they need to do. And as a result, you have to make trade-offs in order to make that weight limit. One of these trade-offs being longevity of machines. So very, very often, robots, I want to say, have about a 12-hour runtime before they start to see serious fatigue. So these are two quotes from two 1325 students. Takeoff was our practice robot in 2018, Little Body was our practice robot in 2017, and both of them died. And actually, funnily enough, they both died. Every single one of our practice robots always dies at the same time. Our practice robot usually starts to see serious issues the week before DCMP, and by the week before championship, it's done. Our 2018 robot had a serious shaft shear that was basically unfixable, and our 2017 robot would not drive straight, and also the electronics were just done at that point. So yeah, and this is why 1325 will continue to build a practice robot. Practice robots get a lot of runtime. They're tested a lot of things are bolted onto them, added, tested again. And if 1325 was to field a robot that was both our practice robot and competition robot, it definitely would not be able to compete by week 4, which is why we're going to build 2. The competition robot will be primarily and probably only used by the software team for working on autonomous modes and optimizing various loops. And the practice robot will be used for everything else, driver training, R&D. Yeah, everything kind of going from there, because as I said, if we didn't, it wouldn't live very long.
Have you considered since you're not making your both robots in unison, have you considered not making any of your competition parts that you think might be changed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So on 1325, we still slightly rely on sponsors. So for example, our drivetrains are made at sponsors, and our sponsors are a one-hit or a one-shot kind of thing. We send them stuff once, and that's it. We don't get a second shot at it. So for example, drivetrains and stuff like that will have to be sent in unison.
Any of your
For-
more in-house stuff,
For the most part, for the in-house stuff, we'll probably also be making them at the same time. Usually, we try to make our entire manufacturing process only done by students, so we will show them how to make one part, and then they will proceed to make all of the rest. And it would be, at least for 1325, extremely inefficient for us not to make them all in one go. And we fortunately have the luxury of remaking stuff in-house should things go wrong. Over the past couple of years, 1325 has been pretty good at having a robot that works as we expect it when it's first put together. So yeah, this hasn't been much of an issue for us, but yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
How much what does a practice schedule look like? Because you were saying that just before champs, the practice robot's dead.
Oh.
How much
Yeah. Our robots see a lot of runtime. We're a very R&D focused team, so we will test. If we have an idea in our mind, it will definitely at some point be tested on the machine. Also, 1325 has a really rigorous driver training schedule. Back when we had our own practice field, our driver was logging close to 20 hours a week on the practice machine. It's now down to about 10. But yeah, it gets a lot of runtime, it sees a lot of abuse, and oftentimes our practice robot is not very well put together. Our practice robot kind of comes down to let's slap it together and make sure this thing works, and our competition robot is very methodically and well put together. So yeah, in a second you'll kind of see our practice robot usually gets a meeting dedicated to itself at some point in the season where we take it apart and put it back together.
Are you guys going to try to practice with other teams more often now since there's no bag day?
Yeah, so 1325 before, even with the practice robot, we spent a lot of time at practice fields. Yeah, Celtics. We spent a lot of time there. Yeah, so without bag day, that doesn't really change much for us because we will still be going, probably logging the same amount of hours on our robot, but the competition robot will probably only see use by our drivers the week before it competes. We want to make sure that this robot has a full, very nice long life ahead of it before we even get to competition. Yeah. Did that answer your question? Yeah. So, yeah. The thing about driver practice is it is probably the best way to jump a lot in terms of performance. A really good robot kind of only comes down to is as good as its driver. If a robot's only being used to half the capacity by the driver, all that work that you kind of put in to make this really amazing machine isn't being shown. So oftentimes giving your driver a lot of time to practice with that machine, practice specific runs that they're gonna do a lot at a competition, practicing under defense, for example. These are things that can really skyrocket your team in terms of performance. 1325, for example, we've taken some really garbage robots way further than they should have gone because we had a good driver. So yeah, can't recommend enough. Drivers are probably because they're the ones who are controlling it in the end, and I like to say a lot, it's FRC isn't really robots anymore. This last season, it basically wasn't because they were never autonomous. And yeah, if you have a machine that's being controlled by a person, it's a machine, it's not a robot. So yeah, always make sure that the person who's operating it is kind of at their best. And the best way of doing that is making sure they get a lot of time. So yeah, 1325, for example, when we're even designing the robot, for example, drivetrains and stuff, we will go up to our driver and say, what do you want this year? And they will tell us, oh, I want it to be maneuverable, or oh, I think I just want to push through defense this year. And we'll build robots towards drivers' driving style. So yeah. Any questions about driver training? It's one thing I do on 1325 a lot. So a quick start guide to R&D and FRC. So R&D is going to get pretty wild this year, at least I think it will, because now there's no reason to put the robot in the bag. So 1325, for example, before we'd be let's not copy 2056's intake because it would take us so much time to make it. Yeah, but now there's no 30-pound withholding. We don't have to put it together in 6 hours. So hey, let's do it. Which is something that we're going to tend to see a lot more of. But it's very easy to fall into the trap of just copying other teams and then not really gaining anything out of it, which is kind of what I want to talk about next. So, more goals. So, set clear goals for every subsystem. This all comes back down to you need to evaluate the performance of every single subsystem. If you don't have any goals, you have no idea whether it's hitting what you want it to do. So setting very clear goals, think your season goals. What does each subsystem on your robot need to do in order for you to hit your season goals? And these goals can change throughout the season. Should you evaluate what your subsystems need to do wrong, that's totally cool. In week 1, see the game and be like, oh, maybe we need to do this instead because it's way bigger than we thought. So yeah, needs, wants, and wishes are one thing that 1325 does a lot. So what does your system need to do in order to achieve your goals? What does it have to do for you to even put it on the robot? Want, what would you like the system to do? It doesn't have to be the #1 priority, but it should be pretty close to it. And then wishes, in a perfect world, what would you like the system to do? It's usually more of a fantasy. But yeah, needs and wants, what does it have to do, and what would you like it to do? So offsets our 2018 robot. It picked up yellow cubes and like put it on the scale and switch. So it had a little intake that kind of like shot out, and it would try and grab cubes. So these are the goals that were written on the whiteboard during kickoff, or around kickoff time. It was, we need to have the cube enter the robot in a predictable way every single time. So predictable, meaning the cube needed to enter a robot in such a way that we know what orientation it would always be in. We didn't want it to come into the robot in like a weird angle or anything like that. We wanted to make sure that we knew how it would sit inside the robot. We wanted the intake to intake the cube sub 1 second from any time any spinning component came into contact with the cube, and then also having the ability to reverse the intake to spit it back out. So yeah, we had 2 wants. These were 2 things that we would have really liked the intake to be able to do. And the wish was to intake sideways cubes if they're sitting on the 11-inch dimension. We never hit the wish, but that was okay. So yeah. So these are really important. We'll see in a minute because you will use these to evaluate the performance of your subsystem. So after a competition, this will be kind of your metric to understand whether or not things on your robot are working the way you would like them to.
So with the need, want, wish, where did the hatch panel ground intake sit in that sort of list for you guys this year?
So hatch panel intake was our need. It was the #1 thing that we wanted it to do.
Like from the ground was the...
Yeah, so we realized that, hey, from the ground was the #1 thing that we wanted because we wanted to pick up from teams who were dropping or things that were falling off. Then the want was pick up from the human player station. And if you look at our robot, you can see the trade-off there. Our robot was really good at picking them up off the ground. It was really bad at picking them up off, like horrendously bad at picking them up off the human player station. So yeah, good question. So design a robot that wants to be iterated. This kind of comes down to make sure you make certain considerations when you're designing your robot that allows it to be workable later on in the season. So this can be from things such as separating your systems, so like 4 or 5 scoring elements don't hinge on one mechanism, because if you get that one mechanism wrong, your robot can't do anything. And another one being, can I fit an Allen key in here? Does a wrench be able to grab this nut, or once I tighten it, is that it forever? And yeah, so yeah, modularity, the degree to which a system's components can be separated, recombined, often with the benefit, flexibility, and variety in use. So this is kind of sectioning off your subsystems in such a way that they can have interaction, but making sure, say your intake isn't working, replacing your intake and putting something else, it's not going to be affecting every other component of your robot, because then things start to get really, really complicated when you're developing. So this is 1325's 2018 elevator gearbox. It is currently sandwiched between 2 drive motors, a compressor, and then a shaft that runs right in front of it. Please don't do this. This gearbox, if one of these VersaPlanetaries was to lose a set screw, it would take us 4 hours to replace it. It was like half of our elevator would have to come apart to get this gearbox out. It was not a great time, and it all could have been solved if there was a hole right there that could let an Allen key go all the way through. So don't do this. Make sure that, like, for example, in a system such as this, that, okay, should something go wrong, should a VersaPlanetary need to come out, should a motor burn out, can I get it out between time from a match to the next match? Because if this ever went wrong for us at a competition, thank God it didn't, we'd be out for probably half a day. So please don't do this. And yeah, I think first kind of listened to my talk last year and made this a rule where you have to put a compressor on your robot, but always put a back system on the robot. It's way easier to take one off than it is to put one on. Yeah, and like air is like super useful in FRC. Like you'll find yourself in the middle of the season being like, wouldn't it be sick if something went from here to here and back to here? And that's like a piston. And like definitely have a pneumatic system on your robot, and it's often really easy, should you be like week 4 and you're like, you know what, this is just taking up weight, to take it off. The holes are there, or however you're mounting it is still there, so it shouldn't need to go back on. But I can't recommend this enough. It's like in 1325's like design handbook that we give to designers, is they must always design a robot with a pneumatic system on board, which was learned the hard way when we added one halfway through a season. So robot development meeting. So this is after a competition where you assess where your robot sits compared to the goals that you had set for it. So this is revisiting your needs, your wants, your wishes for every single subsystem, evaluating how well each mechanism was achieving this, list any problems that occurred at the event, and then fix them, or set a plan to fix them. So this is kind of 1325's way of doing it. It's not super technologically savvy. It's like a whiteboard, or a chalkboard in this case. And we would go through every single subsystem, so you have our drive, our intake, our outtakes, our elevators, and we would talk about what went wrong at the event. So, for example, did a set screw come loose? Did software cause something to go wrong? And then we would evaluate our performance pretty objectively by looking at match video, saying, okay, are we really slow at driving? Are other teams faster than us? Where were teams able to get the edge on us when we were scoring on scales or switches or on rockets and cargo ships? And we would talk about and kind of brainstorm ideas or ways we thought we could fix these things. Oftentimes, some of this stuff is super easy. It's like a pretty quick software change. Some of them might be add a spring here or remove something. So after everything that our heart desires about what we think we could do to the robots listed, so some of this include removing the drop center of our drivetrain and stuff like that. We would decide what is worth actually making a modification for, what is the #1 priority for us going to our next event, and can things be delayed? So in this, for example, we have York here and master kind of things go on. We would list these things somewhere in here to figure out when we would like it to be done by. So for example, over there you can see making our robot faster, we wanted to up our gear ratios, but we realized, you know what, for our next event, it's not really worth it. Let's push it off to right before DCMP or our last event. We'll do it then. And then more pressing issues, such as sometimes the cube can fall out if you hit us too hard. Okay, that needs to get solved right now. And yeah, as a team, we would spend usually about a day. We spend an entire meeting just going through all of these things. And then lastly, we would assign a mentor and a student to every single item on that list, and it would be their responsibility to develop it. A big part of this before was every single time we were deciding what changes we want to make, we had to make sure that they were 30 pounds and they were going to happen they could be modified in 6 hours because of unbag. This is no longer the case. So some of our changes to the robot may start to get a little bit more drastic. So for example, changing the drive ratio, we don't need to worry about that taking up half of our unbag time because we can just do it well before our next event. So some of these things may start to move closer to our next event rather than being spread out a lot more. There'll be a big implication that no bag will have on us. Okay. This is one thing that 1325 really didn't do for a very long time. It was a lot of, I like to attribute it to really boosting our performance. Because now the entire team is on one page, everybody knows what they're collectively working towards, and you don't have a bunch of small little projects kind of happening, and then half of them don't end up coming together because they didn't have enough people and resources put into developing them. So strongly recommend doing this. So sometimes you get to a mechanism and you're like, you know what, this thing sucks. Is some things to think about before completely starting over on a mechanism is the issue fundamental? Is it fundamental to the concept? Are you trying to intake something from the top and everyone else is intaking them from the sides and that's working out way better? And if the issue is fundamental in concept, yeah, you probably should start over. At that point, there isn't really much you can do. Have you seen or thought of a cool idea for a mechanism? So have you seen a 114's intake? You're like, well, that's sick. That worked really well for us. Caution when going here, because I've seen a lot of teams will copy an intake or something from another team, and it will be worse than what they had before. And you'll be surprised how many small intricacies go into designing things like that. So for example, you could look at it and you could be like, that looks super simple, it's just a thing that spins and it kind of sits like this, it's sprung. But then later on, you'll kind of realize oh, there were certain design considerations made when putting this together that needed to be tested before kind of slapping it together. And often you can get yourself into a lot of trouble by just going off of a picture of another robot. So yeah, this kind of leads into my next point. Always test an idea. Just because 114 did it doesn't mean it'll work for you. Yeah, so kind of going into that, this is 1325's copy of 114's 2015 intake. Yeah, we like literally pulled up a photo of it and designed it. But we didn't just copy exactly what 1114's intake kind of looked like, because before this came this monstrosity, which was our prototype for it. This was put together in about half an hour. It's pretty simple. It's just like a piece of wood on a pivot with 2 pistons on it, and there's a robot that we're borrowing air from right now. And this was us testing whether or not this would work. And we found some really fundamental things. We figured out how far away these arms need to be from the front of our robot. Playing with various wheels, we figured out that this needed to be a much harder wheel than that one needed to be in order for it to intake, or else it would just get jammed between the 2. We figured out how much leverage we needed on these pistons to make sure that it would stay hard enough to spin the cube around without getting it stuck in between. So these were things, had we not tested it, we would have had no idea, and our intake probably would not have worked the first time. Another thing where a lot of teams can go wrong with prototyping is they try and prove that a roller can pick up a ball. Spoiler, it absolutely can. Almost every time it can. You want to test more of whether or not the system will work for your machine. So putting together a realistic prototype of making sure that all of this geometry can be copied and used on your robot, so everything you learned from your prototype can actually be translated to your detailed design. A lot of times, people will just kind of like put a giant roller and have a drill and put it down and it like sucks the ball, and you're like, okay. But you didn't really learn anything from that. You learned a spinning thing can move a ball. So yeah, so for example, 1325 on here, all of this geometry was translated into the design. So for example, how far this piston is from that wheel, the distance between these wheels, how far it stuck out, was all translated over to this much cleaner design. But all of that stuff is still the same, and that's what fundamentally allowed this mechanism to work somewhat well. So yeah, testing. This is what makes or breaks your robot. Testing is a really important part of FRC. You need to make sure that you do it right, because oftentimes if you don't, it can lead you in a very wrong direction or not give you enough information to make educated decisions. So evaluating issues with your system, develop a solution, implement, test, and kind of repeat. So in FRC, bias becomes a huge thing. It's been on 1325 for a number of years and plenty of other teams around. So bias is a prejudice in favor or against one thing, person, or group compared with another, usually in a way considered to be unfair. So bias happens often when you kind of put together a mechanism yourself, you prototype it, you test it, and then in the end it's not working out. You do everything kind of in your power to make sure that it comes off better, and this just doesn't help teams kind of make educated decisions. So good ways to mitigate bias is test a system with multiple people present. Often you don't want the person who designed it to test it, but in FRC that's usually not possible. But just testing it with multiple people. If you hate a system, maybe sit it out. If you have like something against compliant wheels, have a seat. You don't need to sit in testing that. Take quantitative data and largest data set possible. So whenever you're testing something, you always want to test exactly with numbers whether or not it's better than the iteration before it. Usually, it looks better doesn't really cut it, because oftentimes, for example, intaking a cube changes in performance are very, very minimal. So 1325's 2018 intake tests look like this. We were timing how long it took an intake. It takes to intake a cube from the moment a wheel was touching it. A lot of phones now have really nice slow motion cameras, which allows us to get a pretty good ballpark of how long it's taking us to grab it. We would use a set of 20 cubes, send them into the intake by changing the angle by 10 degrees. So start like this, and then we'll go like this, and go like this. And we would just keep feeding it into the robot, and see how many jam. Was it more or less than the iteration before it? And then we would repeat the above test with cubes on different sizes. So sides, we tried the 11-inch dimension, the 13-inch dimension. And this was a really good way for us to kind of go about seeing whether or not a change we had made was better. And using these tests oftentimes would make us go back an iteration before. We would spend a lot of time kind of develop something new. We try it out, and it would be either just as good or worse. So we would switch back. And this is really important stuff, because had we not done this, our 2018 robot probably would not have been very good. So yeah. When you're testing stuff, if you're testing to see if it now achieves a want, you added a new feature to it, make sure it still hits the need. Oftentimes, small changes can have consequences that you can't really foresee. 1325, for example, we added a bar in our robot to change the angle of a cube, and it was like super harmless. It was like a piece of Lexan, and we were like, okay, cool, it'll be fine. And we didn't really test it. And then we got to a competition, and we could no longer intake cubes in auto, and it took us close to 2 days to figure out why. And the reason was because this little Lexan bar was pushing up against a cube when it was next to the switch, and we couldn't grab it anymore. So it's really, really important to make sure that you thoroughly test things out, and even test out all aspects of your machine to make sure that they're doing what you thought. So yeah, this is kind of like the end of my talk. Ooh, I'm like 10 minutes early. So these are my ramblings about offset. So what these were documents that me and another mentor created within the 1 day after our 2018 robot went to compete. So within the 2 days after an event, we would write up this, usually about 2 pages, about what went right at the event, what went wrong, and then ideas for what we thought were important to change. So for example, in here, you will be able to read kind of the process of how a robot started the season, how it ended the season. And it's like, since it was written within the 2 days after an event, it really captures how many changes that robot went through, our design thinking, our testing process, and all the modifications that went into that machine. I strongly recommend giving it a look, because it's probably the closest you can get to seeing how a 1325 robot is competed without actually being on our team. So yeah, I'm gonna leave that up. Does anyone have any questions for me?